Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the show that unpacks complex topics, trying to give you the most compelling insights from our sources. And today, we are diving into something, well, frankly astonishing. It's this fundamental truth you might not even think about. Your body, every single cell, is profoundly electrical. Yeah, and to show you just how profound, let me tell you about Sally Adi. She's a journalist, and she signed up for this, she called it a gonzo experience. It was a U.S. Defense Department simulation. So picture this. She's got this device, TDCS, transcranial direct current stimulation, strapped to her head. It's sending just a tiny current, a few milliamps from a 9-volt battery, through her skull. And her mission, to see if it'd make her a better shot. The idea was, could this little bit of electricity recalibrate her own bioelectric signals, maybe boost focus, alertness? What happened next, honestly, sounds like science fiction. In just 3 minutes, Adi went from her words, desk-slumping journalist, to a battle-ready assassin, took out every single target. She said the feeling was just incredible. Like someone had, quote, finally hit the off switch on all the distracting negative self-talk. Wow.
It's an amazing story, isn't it? And what's so fascinating about Adi's experience is that it's this really vivid, modern glimpse of a scientific truth that, frankly, scientists are only now really starting to appreciate, which is that we are fundamentally electrical systems. So today, we want to explore what some researchers are now calling the electrome.
The electron.
Yeah, it's this unique, really intricate blueprint of electrical properties that quite literally defines every aspect of your life and your death, actually. So our mission for you in this deep dive is to take you on a journey. We're looking at over 200 years of scientific discovery, debates, from the very first sparks of understanding right up to today's cutting-edge biotech. We'll try to uncover the really pervasive, sometimes quite perplexing, role electricity plays in every single cell of your body. You can think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to understanding your own hidden electrical world, right down to the wiring.
Okay, right down to the wiring. I like that. So speaking of those early sparks,
Yeah.
people saw weird electrical stuff for centuries, right? Amber attracting dust, electric eels, lightning, obviously. But it wasn't until 1600 William Gilbert actually coined the word electricity from electron, the Greek for amber, gave it a name. But when did scientists really start thinking that maybe living things could make their own electricity?
Well, for that, we need to jump to the late 1700s. And this really fascinating, sometimes pretty fiery clash between two scientific giants, Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta. Galvani was a physician, and he did these famous frog experiments. He noticed frog legs would twitch if you hit them with static electricity or even just touch them with two different kinds of metal.
Right, the classic frog leg twitch.
Exactly. And he got convinced this was animal electricity, some kind of inherent vital force within the living tissue itself. There's that story, maybe not true, about his wife making soup.
Yeah, I've heard that one. But his contemporary, Volta, he wasn't buying it.
Not at all. Alessandro Volta aggressively challenged him. He argued the twitching was purely down to the dissimilarity of the metals, what he called metallic electricity. He basically saw the poor frog tissue as just a moist conductor, a passive thing, not the source.
That sounds like a pretty strong argument against Galvani. Kind of debunked him, didn't it?
It certainly seemed that way at the time, but Galvani, he didn't give up. He did this crucial experiment, often overlooked, actually. He showed that if you just touched a nerve to the muscle using only biological tissue, no different metals involved, the leg still twitched.
So no metals needed.
Precisely. He proved the current had a physiological origin. He called it fundamental for the foundation of all electrophysiology. And he was right. It was a huge step, recognizing this wasn't just external electricity affecting life, but something from within.
But despite that proof, Volta kind of won the PR war, didn't he? Especially after he invented the battery.
He did. The voltaic pile in 1800, we know it as the battery. It created this continuous current, and it just seemed to, invalidate Galvani's claims in the public eye and much of the scientific community. It pushed that idea of inherent biological electricity way into the background. And sadly, Galvani died pretty much in obscurity.
That's rough. And that skepticism then led to, less scientific things.
Oh, definitely. It opened the floodgates for what you could call electro-quackery. A whole period of charlatans jumping on the bandwagon. You had people selling Leyden jars claiming to treat every possible ailment. There was James Graham's celestial bed back in 1781, cost something like 9,000 pounds in today's money.
9,000 pounds? For what?
It supposedly cured sterility using just the idea of electricity. It just shows you how desperate people were and how easily this new mysterious force could be exploited.
Wow. And wasn't there something called tractors?
Yes. Elisha Perkins' tractors in 1796. Just little pairs of iron and brass rods claimed to cure everything by drawing out something or other. Even George Washington bought a set.
No way, George Washington.
Yeah.
But this whole wave of crackery, it did serious damage. It basically destroyed Galvani's reputation posthumously and made legitimate researchers really wary of touching anything related to bioelectricity for decades.
So it kind of tainted the whole field.
Exactly. It wasn't really until the 1840s that things started to turn around. Émile du Bois-Reymond, he built on observations by others, like Alexander von Humboldt, confirming powerful shocks from electric eels in Venezuela. Du Bois-Reymond unequivocally proved electricity's role in the human body. He called that nerve muscle jolt the action current. And he boldly said he'd restored to life the identity of the nerve substance with electricity. Bioelectricity was cautiously back on the table.
Okay, so we went from twitching frogs and electric eels to finally confirming electricity in us. How did we then figure out how our nerves, our whole nervous system, actually uses this electricity to communicate? What was the breakthrough there? Right, well, that brings us into the early 1900s and the neuron doctrine. Big names like Golgi and Ramon y Cajal gave us the basic structure. You know, neurons with their dendrites, the cell body, and these long axons reaching everywhere. But the huge question was, how does the signal, the action potential, this small electrical message, actually get across the gap between neurons, that tiny space called the synapse?
And this is where the Soups versus Sparks battle comes in.
Precisely. It was a major scientific showdown. Team Soups believed it was all chemistry neurotransmitters, which were discovered around 1921. They thought those carried the message across the gap.
Okay.
But Team Sparks insisted, no, it's got to be electrical transmission. It was, like science's own West Side Story, determining the fundamental language of the brain.
So who won?
Well, the Sparks ultimately carried the day. Thanks largely to Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley in the 1950s. They did these incredible experiments using giant squid nerves because they're huge and easier to work with.
Giant squid nerves.
Mm-hmm. And they proved definitively that action potentials are generated by this really precisely choreographed movement of charged ions across the cell membrane, specifically sodium and potassium ions. That explains why these ions are just absolutely vital for life. Breathing, heartbeats, thinking it all relies on this ion movement. It's basically a rapid, controlled electrical wave created by these ions rushing in and out. That is the language of our nervous system.
That sounds like a Nobel Prize-winning discovery.
It was, but, timing is everything in science. Their massive discovery was almost immediately, sidelined is maybe the word, by Watson and Crick's DNA double helix structure in 1953. The spotlight just shifted dramatically to genetics.
Right, DNA took over the headlines.
It did. But the questions Hodgkin and Huxley raised about how cells control this ion movement, that eventually led to another Nobel Prize for Roderick MacKinnon in 1991.
What does MacKinnon figure out?
He discovered the ion channels, these amazing little protein passages, like tunnels embedded in the cell membranes. And they act like shape sorters almost.
Shape sorter?
Yeah, they're incredibly specific. They only let certain ions, like sodium or potassium, pass through, in or out at the right moment. They're the gatekeepers.
Okay, so let's break that down. How does that create the nerve impulse?
Right. So imagine a nerve cell just sitting there at rest. It's kind of primed like a hair trigger. There's more potassium inside the cell and more sodium outside. This balance is maintained by ion pumps. Think of them as bouncers constantly kicking sodium out and letting potassium in.
Got it. Bouncers maintaining the balance.
Exactly. But then, dotted along the membrane, you have these special channels, voltage-gated sodium channels. Think of them as emergency doors. When the nerve cell gets a strong enough signal zap, these emergency doors bang open.
Okay.
Sodium ions, which were crowded outside, suddenly rush in. The inside of the cell goes from negative to positive really fast. It's like a Panic at the Disco, electrically speaking.
Huh. Panic at the Disco. Love it.
Then, almost immediately, potassium channels open. Potassium rushes out to restore the negative balance inside. And this whole wave, sodium rushing in, potassium rushing out, propagates down the nerve axon. That is the action potential. That's the nerve impulse.
Wow. So it's this incredibly fast choreographed dance of ions.
Yeah.
And you said these ion channels, this electrical machinery. It's not just in nerves.
Absolutely not. That's one of the huge realizations. Ion channels, and therefore these fundamental electrical properties, are in every single cell in your body. Bones, teeth, organs, blood cells, everything.
So what are they doing in, say, bone cells? Or my pancreas?
Well, it tells us that these non-nervous system cells are doing far more with bioelectric signaling than we ever imagined. Take your pancreas example. Specific potassium ion channels discovered by Francis Ashcroft back in 1984 are crucial for coordinating insulin release.
Oh, yeah. How?
They allow the cells to sync up electrically, releasing insulin incredibly quickly, like 10 times faster than chemical signals alone could manage. And if there's a mutation in those channels, it can actually cause a form of diabetes.
That's incredible. So understanding these channels is key for medicine then.
Oh, absolutely. It's become a bedrock of modern medicine. Even studying things like pufferfish toxin tetrodotoxin, which works by blocking sodium channels, helped us understand them better. That knowledge led directly to ion channel drugs.
What kind of drugs are those?
They're vital for treating heart arrhythmias, certain movement disorders, epilepsy, pain. A huge range of conditions rely on manipulating these ion channels.
Okay, so regulating existing electrical signals. What about using electricity for healing? You mentioned cells moving towards electric fields, electrotaxis.
Yes, that's another fascinating area. It's been observed since the 1920s, but often ignored. But then you get people like Richard Borgens. He wasn't your typical scientist, former musician, army medic. He started applying these oscillating electric fields, OFS, to severed lamprey spinal cords. And incredibly, he coaxed the nerve axons to regenerate, to grow back across the gap.
He regrew spinal cords with electricity.
In lampreys, yes. And then he replicated it in guinea pigs, even restoring some motor and sensory function by carefully manipulating the electrical field, even rapidly reversing its polarity. His work was hugely promising. He even helped some paralyzed dogs walk again, and some human patients in trials regain function, like one man, Ingram, being able to dress himself again.
That sounds revolutionary. Why isn't this standard treatment now? Why did it stall?
Well, that's a complex story. And it really highlights the challenges of translating exciting lab work into clinical practice. The company involved, Cyberkinetics, arguably rushed an FDA application.
How so?
They applied for what's called a humanitarian use device status, but critics argued they didn't have enough solid foundational data, especially in mammals. Plus, serious ethical concerns were raised about the trial design itself, like not having a proper control group and the electrical stimulation parameters seeming somewhat arbitrary.
So, scientific and procedural issues.
Exactly, and public criticism from prominent scientists like Miguel Nicolas didn't help. It ended up, as one researcher put it, setting the field back maybe 10 years. A real shame, because the underlying principle seems valid.
But the idea of electrical healing itself isn't dead.
Not at all. We know our bodies generate their own wound currents when skin is broken. And applying external electrical stimulation can significantly speed up healing, almost double the rate for things like severe bed sores. It also helps mend bone fractures faster and aids skin graft success.
So it's about giving the body's own electrical healing system a boost.
Precisely. And technology is catching up. Richard Nucitelli developed something called the Dermacorder around 2011. It's non-invasive, and it can map the topographical three-dimensional electrical map of a wound on your skin.
Like a weather map for wound electricity.
Kind of. And the idea is once you have that map, you can apply targeted electrical stimulation exactly where it's needed to guide cells and accelerate healing. DARPA is actually funding next-gen versions of this for treating traumatic wounds in soldiers.
Amazing. And this electrical influence goes even deeper, right? You mentioned development, how organisms actually form.
Yes, Michael Levin's work here is just mind-blowing. He's shown, for example, using special electrosensitive dyes on frog embryos, that these distinct electrical patterns appear before physical structures form. These patterns precisely presage where the eyes and mouth would eventually develop. It demonstrated that electrical signals aren't just passive byproducts. They actively encode the locations of anatomical features. They're necessary instructions.
So the electrical pattern is like a blueprint.
Exactly, a dynamic electrical blueprint. If you disrupt that pattern, development goes wrong, even if the genes are perfectly normal. Faces can end up deformed, scrambled. It shows electricity plays this fundamental instructional role.
Which also ties into older, maybe dismissed research.
It does. Back in the 1930s, Harold Saxton Burr found these electrical fields, L fields he called them, around organisms. He even found voltage spikes that correlated precisely with ovulation in women. John Rock, a famous fertility doctor at the time, dismissed it.
But Burr was onto something.
He absolutely was. Modern science confirmed it. Those spikes are real, caused by chloride ion fluxes, and similar electrical measurements are now used in some ovulation prediction tests.
Wow. And electricity is involved in fertilization, too.
Oh, yes. There's an electrical on switch for sperm involving calcium currents. And when a sperm enters an egg, it triggers another calcium current that activates the egg. Remarkably, if you artificially zap an unfertilized rabbit egg with a calcium current, you can sometimes induce virgin birth, parthenogenesis.
You can trick an egg into thinking it's fertilized with just an electrical signal.
Essentially, yes. It shows how fundamental these electrical triggers are at the very start of life.
Okay, development, fertilization. What about the darker side, like cancer? Is there an electrical connection there?
There seems to be. Burr, along with Louis Langman in the 1940s, also found that cancerous tissues emitted an unmistakable electrical signature, specifically a marked negativity compared to surrounding healthy tissue, detectable even from a distance.
A diagnostic electrical signal for cancer back in the 40s.
Potentially, yes. But like much of Burr's work, it was largely ignored. Memory hold by the mainstream scientific community, which was focused elsewhere, mainly on genetics and biochemistry.
Was anyone else looking at this?
Well, much later, in the 1980s, Bjorn Nordenström, a Swedish radiologist, became convinced there was a body-wide electrical circulatory system. He even tried treating tumors by inserting electrodes and manipulating currents, but his methods were unconventional, and he was widely dismissed as a quack.
So again, the field faced skepticism. But is newer research revisiting this?
Yes, definitely. Mustafa Cemgoz, starting in the 1990s, found that aggressive metastatic cancer cells often express high levels of specific voltage-gated sodium channels, the same kind we find in nerves.
Sodium channels in cancer cells. Why?
Particularly a type usually found only in fetal development. The thinking is these channels make the cancer cells more excitable, more migratory, helping them invade tissues and spread metastasis.
So could we target those channels with drugs?
That's the exciting prospect. Developing ion channel drugs specifically targeting these channels in cancer cells could be a whole new avenue for treatment, potentially stopping metastasis.
And what about Levin's work? Didn't he do something even more radical with cancer?
He did. His team took tadpoles that had genetically induced tumors, and using optogenetics controlling cell activity with light, they manipulated the voltage of the tumor cells.
And what happened?
They reprogrammed the tumor cells back into looking and behaving like normal tissue. The voltage change alone controlled it. It suggested, incredibly, that in this context, bioelectricity overrides genetics. They didn't change the cancer genes, they changed the electrical conversation, and the cells reverted to normal.
That changes everything. Reprogramming cancer with electricity.
It's a profoundly different way of thinking about cancer, yes. Not just killing rogue cells, but potentially correcting their behavior by fixing their electrical communication.
So as we look ahead, this deep understanding of the electron, how does it change how we interact with, say, the brain, especially with implants?
Well, our ability to even listen in started way back. Richard Caton in 1875 found that feeble current from a resting brain. Then Hans Berger, in the 1920s, actually invented the EEG, inspired by a supposed telepathic experience he had. He discovered those alpha and beta brainwave rhythms.
Right, EEG is pretty standard now.
And Edgar Adrian figured out how nerves encode information. It wasn't just on or off. Individual nerve fibers fire on an all-or-nothing principle, yes, but they transmit complex information like how much a muscle is stretched by varying the frequency and duration of their firing, like a bioelectric Morse code.
Okay, so we learn to listen, then we learn the code, which leads to things like deep brain stimulation, DBS.
Exactly. DBS essentially repurposes cardiac pacemaker technology for the brain. Alam Louis Benabid pioneered it for Parkinson's disease, and the results can be dramatic, really improving tremors and movement control.
And it's used for other things now, too.
Yes. It's expanded to treat severe OCD, targeting Brodmann Area 25. Work pioneered by Helen Maybird showed significant improvement in 60–70% of patients with treatment-resistant depression. Also, Tourette's, epilepsy, chronic pain.
But it's not a perfect fix, is it? I've heard about side effects.
No, it's definitely not perfect, and the mechanisms are still poorly understood. As one expert vividly put it, it's like playing that piano with a mallet. You're sending a relatively crude electrical signal into a complex network. This can lead to unexpected, sometimes bizarre side effects. There was the famous case of Mr. B suddenly developing an obsession with Johnny Cash after his DBS for OCD. Others have reported increased impulsivity, like gambling problems.
Playing the piano with a mallet. That's a sobering analogy. And what about more sophisticated implants? Weren't there big plans for things like memory implants?
There are huge ambitions. Brian Johnson's startup Kernel back in 2016 raised $100 million betting on developing prosthetic memory implants.
What happened with that?
Well, it highlighted the immense technical challenges. The main tool for research, the only FDA-approved implant for this kind of recording, is the Utah array. It's a tiny grid of electrodes.
Okay.
But it can only reliably listen to maybe a few hundred neurons out of billions. And crucially, being a foreign object made of metal, it inevitably triggers an immune response in the brain tissue. Scar tissue forms, the signal degrades over time.
So the implants themselves are a problem.
They are. Metal and silicon just aren't a great match for soft, sensitive brain tissue. There's a mismatch in elasticity, the immune system attacks them, they can corrode, the signals fade, often requiring risky replacement surgeries. People are working on alternatives, like Phil Kennedy's neurotrophic electrode designed to encourage nerve growth, or futuristic ideas like neural dust or injectable neural lace. But we're not there yet.
Which brings up huge ethical questions, doesn't it? Especially for the patients involved in these trials.
Absolutely critical questions. Jennifer French, who is herself tetraplegic and a patient advocate, makes this point powerfully. She champions the need for test pilots to advance neurotechnology, but she also warns strongly against media hype creating false hope.
Right, managing expectations.
And demanding complete transparency about the very real risks and limitations. Patients need to know exactly what they're signing up for. And then there's the work of ethicist Frederick Gilbert on explantation.
Explantation? What's that?
It's what happens when the implant needs to come out. Or worse, what happens if the company funding the trial goes bankrupt. Patients are often not clearly informed about this. They could potentially be left with a non-functioning device inside them or face surgery to remove it, possibly returning them to their previous debilitating state. Gilbert calls it potentially like something out of Blade Runner.
That's horrifying, a forced downgrade.
It's a serious ethical consideration that needs addressing upfront. And, it's not just these advanced implants. We impact our electrome in ways we often don't consider. Well, some epilepsy drugs taken during pregnancy are known to cause birth defects by interfering with ion channels crucial for fetal development. Nicotine and alcohol also disrupt these electrical processes in developing brains. Even general anesthesia, its exact mechanisms are still largely unknown. How it affects neuronal firing. Michael Levin finds it amazing that any of us ever come back from it the same person as who went in.
That is kind of unnerving when you put it like that.
Even something seemingly harmless like licorice, abusing it can fatally destabilize heart rhythm because a compound in it messes with potassium channels. Our electrical balance is delicate.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is.
It does, and it highlights a problem Levin often points out, the institutional silos in science. Bioelectricity research sometimes faces skepticism, not because the data isn't there, but because it crosses disciplinary boundaries. People are trained in genetics or biochemistry, and they approach problems through that lens only. But as Levin says, nature doesn't have departments. We need that more integrated view.
So if we adopt that integrated view and acknowledge the limitations of sticking metal in our bodies, where does the future lie? Is it still about silicon upgrades?
Maybe not. We're seeing this really exciting shift towards using biological materials, things that the body is more likely to accept, using porous coral structures as scaffolds for bone grafts, for example.
Coal for bones.
Yeah, or looking at compounds from marine organisms, snails, jellyfish for other tissue engineering. And then there's work like Marco Rolandi's. He built a biological transistor using chidosan that's derived from squid pens, basically.
A transistor made from squid.
Yes. And crucially, it controls the flow of protons, not electrons, like in silicon chips. This opens up possibilities for protonic transistors or maybe even edible batteries that could interface directly and seamlessly with our body's own proton-based signaling, working with biology, not against it.
Wow. And that leads us to xenobots. That sounds straight out of sci-fi.
It kind of is. Xenobots are these tiny, they're described as living, programmable organisms. They're made from frog skin and heart muscle cells.
Made from frog cells. But they're organisms.
They assemble themselves into novel forms. They can move purposefully. They can work together to gather particles. They can heal themselves if cut. And most astonishingly, they've even been shown to self-reproduce in a way never seen before in biology or robotics. They gather loose cells into piles that then develop into new xenobots.
Okay, that's genuinely unnerving. What are they for?
The potential applications are things like targeted drug delivery inside the body, cleaning up microplastics, but their creators call them a new class of artifact. It definitely raises profound ethical questions. Are they machines? Are they organisms? Where's the line? It's like opening Pandora's box, some might say.
It really challenges that whole paradigm of humans having inferior meat bodies that need upgrading with silicon, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. This whole deep dive suggests that maybe the most powerful answers, the most sophisticated upgrades, might actually lie within biology itself. By learning to understand and speak its electrical language.
So wrapping this up, this journey through bioelectricity has been pretty mind-bending, from a twitching frog leg centuries ago to controlling brain circuits, healing wounds, maybe even reprogramming cancer and creating entirely new living machines.
It really forces you to rethink what your body is. It's not just this collection of chemicals governed by genes. It's a profoundly electrical entity communicating constantly through this intricate, often hidden language of ions and voltages. That language shapes you, heals you, is you in a fundamental way. Understanding this, it isn't just, abstract scientific curiosity. It's about appreciating the incredible, almost fractal complexity and wonder of you, and the immense power residing in these biological systems that we're only just truly beginning to grasp.
So here's a final thought for you to take away, something to mull over from this deep dive. Given everything we've discussed, the body's innate electrical intelligence, its capacity for self-repair, even self-creation demonstrated by things like xenobots, what if the most powerful upgrade we could ever achieve isn't some external device we plug in, but actually learning to decode and maybe even speak the electrical language that already builds and rebuilds us from the inside out? What incredible potentials might be lying dormant within our own electrome, just waiting for us to discover them?